Design and Development at ETF, with chairing the session today. If you're interested in practical lessons from cognitive neuroscience and psychology for resilience, well-being and performance outcomes, then you're in the right room. You'll notice at the top of the right there on your screen, there are a few different tabs where you can put comments on the chat and share with everyone who's also watching the session. And please then send any questions you might have to this for the speaker into the Q&A box. If someone else then really appreciates that question, you might want to see it answered. It would be really useful if you can upvote, and then I'll give me a nudge to make sure that particular question gets asked. There's also a notes function tab, which you can take notes and you can email those to yourself after the session. And also do remember to use the hashtag @SetConf20 when tweeting about the conference. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Major Jim Crompton and Adam Brown, who are here to share their insights about cognitive neuroscience and application in education from their background in the British Army and military. So over to you both. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. So yeah, I'm Jim, and I'm going to open up, and then we'll let Adam go through some of the other detail. So we work at the Army Recruiting and Initial Training Command Staff Leadership School. But that essentially means that we are here for initial teacher training, initial trainer training for anybody that is going to work with British Army recruits or trainees. And we'll explain a little bit about that as we go along. In the session today, we are really looking at cognitive neuroscience, why we think it's important, but how it can really help to predict behaviours so that we can work best to provide a support mechanism, a support network to enable people to perform at their best when they're in training. So a bit about the context. Firstly, we work with trainers that work with recruits and trainees. So those are people that are in their initial period in the army. So a recruit, somebody that's been a civilian, joins the army, and they're training to become a soldier, anywhere from 12 weeks through to up to a year, depending on the courses that they do. And then the trainees are those that then go on to their initial trades training. So that would be apprenticeships and all of their trade skills. The vast majority that we get are somewhere between 16 and 39, mostly young adults. And actually, they tend to fit around the sort of 18 through 20 age group, many of the people joining us. Now, this does mean that we'll be looking at them in terms of adolescent brains. So what is it about their brains that means that they're going to behave differently to what we would normally think of as a sort of a rational adult? We're going to cover practical applications. So we're going to talk about real life case studies. We're going to talk about some of the things we've done. We are going to look at well-being and resilience, but importantly, we'll look at well-being and resilience from the view of performance. So rather than it being something where you have to help to treat people, it's all about making people as effective as they can possibly be from the outset, and then they learn those resilience skills as they go through. In terms of the caveats, please, we will provide some generalizations. They're fairly important. Everybody is different, so everybody's brain development will happen at a different pace, and the solutions will be different to everybody. So it's really important that you understand your learners. It is in a military context, so it's not all about telling people what to do. We've come a long way from there. There's a certain time when orders are orders, but actually the focus is on how can we get people to really want to be where they are and do their best for the organization. And then the final caveat is brain pictures. So in 2008, there was some research that was conducted by McCabe and Castell, and they said, if you talk about brain science and you provide pictures of the brain, people are far more likely to believe that it's scientifically valid. I don't think you'll find that from the Gym Age 5 pictures that you'll get to see, but I'll let you come to your own conclusions. Adam.
Oh, thank you very much, Jim. So I'm going to set the scene as it says up there. So what I want you to do, we're going to start initially with a military picture. And what I want you to do is I want you to think about army base spoke about. And in the army, that basic training lasts anywhere from 12 weeks up to nearly a year in some cases. And we're going to focus on one recruit. And he's been at that training for probably about 4 to 5 weeks. And he's finding his way. And the moment we're going to look is first thing in the morning at 7 a.m. So 7 a.m. in the morning will be their first parade. And our recruit that we're talking to will be down on parade, standing in a line with all of his other recruits. What's happened at this point is their section commander, or as civilians would know it, the immediate line manager, will come along the line and he'll give them inspection to make sure that they've got all they need for the day. And in this case, he's inspecting their water bottles to make sure that they're fully hydrated. They've got a full water bottle to last them the whole day. And he gets to our recruit, and our recruit has only got half a water bottle, 3/4. He's had a few big gulps on the way down to parade. At which point, our section commander, our line manager at this point, gets frustrated, doesn't get why he hasn't got a full water bottle, so gives him a dressing down, has a bit of a shout at him, and sends him, gives him some press ups just to remind him why he's failed. So has a shout at him, gives him some press ups, and carries on checking the rest of the recruits. Now, let's fast forward. Let's go on to the first lesson of the day, rifle handling. Now, our recruit, who had the press ups before, is really struggling to understand the parts and how to handle the rifle correctly for a multitude of reasons. And the section commander at this point thinks, I know why he's forgetting. He's not awake. He's not woken up. So he sends him for a run. He sends him, see that tree? Go for a run. And then on the way back, gives him a bit of a dressing down and tells him to get on with the lesson. Well, at this point, the recruit has a bit of an outburst. He's frustrated. He's trying, but he's not getting it. So he has an outburst, at which point the section commander, feeling threatened, he has an outburst. And then there's that big shouting match that happens between the two of them until another section commander steps in. Now, the same principle applies to all settings. So let's put it in a civilian setting. A civilian setting, potentially a student going to a college, let's say. He's been there for 6 months. He knows the way of things. And he's been there 6 months. That first lesson on a Monday, he turns up late. He walks in through the door, barreling through the door slightly late. And the teacher at the time, he's new to the job, possibly slightly nervous as well, feeling threatened, feeling his authority's been challenged, gives that student a dressing down. Well, the student's not having that, losing face in front of his peers, so tells the teacher to get stuffed. Well, language in that area. Tells him to get stuffed. Well, the teacher, again, not having that, not having disobedience in his classroom, tells him to get stuffed. And there's a big argument ensues. So he sends him out to head of faculty. Now, the student comes back from head of faculty, slightly more calm, but still struggling to understand the lesson as the lesson's been going on. He's struggling to understand it. And again, not to lose face in front of his peers, starts to act up, starts to make his peers laugh. And the scene starts again. And the cycle keeps going over and over. Now, in both these scenarios, we need to ask ourselves a couple of questions. Why did it get so out of hand? Why did the student lose control? And why did the teacher lose control of the situation? Now, in order to understand that, we need to look a little bit more about the brain. Now, that's that drawing we were telling you about. Jim, aged 5. Jim was drawing brains. I was eating worms. We're well happy of that. But we're going to break that down even more. So first of all, we're going to look at what's called the parietal lobe. Now, Professor Stephen Peters coined this phrase as the computer. And just as a computer turns ones and zeros into a picture, the parietal lobe turns senses into a picture. So I'm holding an apple, I'm looking at an apple, it smells like an apple, that's an apple. And that's what our parietal lobe does. And once it works out what it is, it sends the message forward to the prefrontal cortex. Now, the prefrontal cortex, that, again, Professor Stephen Peters said, that's the human part, the logical part of our brain. That's the part that says, right, we've seen an apple, What do we do with apples? Now, the important bit to remember about the prefrontal cortex is that's the last bit of the brain to develop, around somewhere between 25 and 30. So the brain at that point goes, that's an apple, we eat apples. Sends the message back to the parietal lobe. The parietal lobe runs the program how to eat an apple. Now, we need to think about what gets in the way of that. The part that gets in the way is the limbic system. This is what's called the chimp, or the chimp. The book, The Chimp Paradox, is based around the limbic system, and that chimp, like a chimp, is highly emotional. It is the first part that's born, the first part that's grown within our brain, and it can override everything else. And as soon as that feels threatened, it will shut to the brain. So we won't get the information out. Parts of the limbic system we need to really focus on are the amygdala. Now, that's our emotional response. So if an information comes in, the amygdala sees either whether it's a threat, is it a good thing, is it a bad thing? If it's a threat, do we fight, flight, or freeze? If it's a good thing, do I need to give a reward for that? And that comes with the second bit, which is the nucleus accumbens. That's the reward pleasure area. Now, parts of the teenage adolescent brain is that it's highly addictive. So when we get a good, apples are good, brilliant, here's some dopamine, we get addicted to that. Another example, text messages. When we get that thumbs up, that like, release of dopamine, that feels good. It sends a message, this is a good thing, up to our parietal lobe. Our parietal lobe goes, right, what do we do with that? Sends forward to that logical part, we answer it, comes back, we run the program. Now we understand how that works, we need to understand how our brain grows. Now, the important bit is this thing called myelination. That's our brain when it's turning white matter to grey matter. Wrong, grey matter to white matter. It's been a whole moment and a whole morning on that one alone. And what happens there is that it makes our brain work quicker and faster, and then neural connections more efficient. Now that happens up until we're 25, 30. So until that moment, you've got a student who is acting emotionally, and understandably so, because that middle part, that limbic system, that's what's in control of all of their systems. And that's till they're 30. But there's lots we can do about it. I'm going to hand back to Jim to cover what we can do about it.
So, please, we're not suggesting that people's brains aren't actually full by the time that as they're growing. It's just in terms of some of the development of the different areas of the brain that can take a bit of time. So, we've now got a whole picture. We can see that limbic system and then some of the solutions in the parietal lobe, they are designed pretty early on. It makes us fairly emotional. And then the prefrontal cortex, that area around the front of the brain with the rational thought, just takes a bit longer to develop effectively. So that means until people are effectively in their 30s, then actually you can expect that they're more likely to have an emotional response to something and not be able to plan effectively and come out with rational responses. So this is exactly Colonel Bradley Kilpatrick from the Australian Defence Force Academy found. A few years ago at the ADFA, he found that there were fairly significant behavioural issues, and he wanted to work out why. And he chose to understand the brain a bit better so that he could understand people's behaviour. Gareth Bloomfield of the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst as well for several years now has been looking at why it is that officer cadets behave in particular ways and how we can support them. So what's really important is, the first one is you need to be healthy. So in order to be able to process rational thought, brain health is really important, and it's much like body health in many ways. So you have to get enough sleep. So 6 to 9 hours is optimal depending on every individual. And Brad Kilpatrick even went in to look at circadian rhythms in terms of what time you wake people up and all the rest. But sleep is important. Exercise is important because it maintains blood flow and it makes sure that actually your body and your brain can function optimally. And the only one that's not written up there is diet. So high protein diets don't work particularly well for brain function. The brain needs a certain amount of carbohydrate so it can really access all of the thought it requires. So that's the picture, and that brings us to some of our case studies. So as Adam mentioned at the beginning, in terms of the trainer-trainee dynamic, we have our recruits. They may be around about 18 years old. And then the section commanders, we believe in role modeling. So it means that our trainers are only a few years really ahead of them, which means that they both effectively have adolescent brains. So we really focus on this by helping to develop our trainers so that they understand what is going on in terms of the neuroscience, but then also in terms of how they can react. So it's prior preparation preventing poor performance. We allow people to really focus on what it is that they want to get out of a training session and understand how they're going to get it. Interestingly, so something's just come up on the screen. There you go. Interestingly, the section commander is taken through mental resilience training. So we look at how do you regulate your behavior? How do you manage your breathing? How do you ultimately plan to make sure that you are as healthy as you can possibly be and able to make the right decisions? We then look at positive self-talk. We look at how to deal with negative thoughts and all the rest. So the section commander really is fully equipped to be able to understand themselves and their recruits. For extrinsic reward and motivation, the Army's really good giving people medals, awards, public praise. And actually, Brad Kilpatrick did some work that showed that praising somebody privately isn't really enough to create that dopamine hit. So extrinsic reward and motivation at the Army Foundation College, junior soldiers are actually given ranks, which enables them through demonstrating the right behaviours to show how well they're doing. And this praise is then given outwardly. So they can show their friends, so they can show their colleagues, anyone they respect, their families. And this is where you get that real dopamine hit, which allows them then to start to develop good practice and form stepping stones on the way to their ultimate goal. For coaching for longer term planning, every recruit is given a training diary. So they start their initial time as a soldier and they're initially given a training diary, and within the first few days they will start to fill this in. So over the last year or so that's been linked to the Compass for Life program by Floyd Woodrow and his team, and this really gets people to think about what it is that motivates them, why are they there, and what do they want to get out of the Army. The Army in itself isn't necessarily the ends, it can just be the means to the end. And once everybody understands what it is they're trying to get out of it, it really helps them to be present, to be a part of the organisation and committed to it fully for whatever reason it is. But that's really important, and that's shared often between the recruits and the trainees and the trainers, so that it's an all-informed network. For the trainers, it's different. So on course, we introduce all of our trainers to coaching. We use some simple models and we encourage further study and accreditation so they can develop. But then we have something called Coaching Culture, which is commercial software, which enables people really to look at self-coaching and start to develop those behaviours that we want to see. But also, it helps people to understand how they can help develop others. And finally, troubleshooting. So the mental resilience training package that we have in the Army really looks at how to manage things before they get wrong. So how you prepare for performance, but also how you prepare for setbacks. So understanding what it is that you might be physically going through and how to deal with that. Now, one thing I will say is these skills, these tools, these techniques, they're all really useful, but it never, ever, ever is a substitute for really understanding your people. because it's only through understanding your people that you can understand when somebody has got to the stage where actually they can't necessarily cope. And it might not be a simple framework that you put together. They may need some additional support. And there you can see the 4 areas that we've gone through, which leads us to another diagram of the brain. The trainer-trainee dynamic is all about the whole of the brain. So this is how the science fits in. The whole of the brain, we need to understand it to understand people's behaviour. Troubleshooting as well. This is actually just about how people are going to react at a certain time. So through coaching, you start to preload that prefrontal cortex. So make sure that people understand exactly what it is that they're trying to achieve and how they're going to get there. So that's really important for longer term planning. And then extrinsic reward and motivation really focuses on the limbic system. So where people cannot quite get to the planning for the long-term goals, we put in support mechanisms to help them. Then obviously brain health is that one thing that's going to help all the way through. And these are some of the solutions that we've been discussing. So the training and the further study, the ongoing support, the recruit training diaries, the Army's mental resilience training program. All of these effectively work as a patchwork. So each one of them is useful. They have they have benefits for the organisation. But actually working together, we provide a really useful, ultimately patchwork quilt, which is far more effective than any of the individual measures. And please, as I said before, don't take our word for it. The references here will take you to some of the research that we've been doing, to some of the packages that we use, so that you can help to understand for your own context how it works. Also, at the bottom of there are NHS, Samaritans and Mind, who are really, really useful organisations. At some point, people may well come to a stage where they don't have the resilience to be able to continue to cope. That is absolutely fine. And helping to identify that early is the way to maintaining success and helping people the best you possibly can. So there are times when absolutely people just need signposting. In the Army, we do have a significant welfare system, and we still rely on these links to make sure that people are properly looked after. But ultimately, all of this should be about performance. So well-being and resilience and all of these things only become relevant because we're talking about how somebody performs, how somebody is, and what they can do for themselves and for the organisation. And we do that ultimately through coaching. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Adam, and thank you, Jim. Adam, could you turn your camera back on if you get the chance there? It's suddenly sort of become.
All right, no dramas. I think we've lost it potentially.
Thank you. So we've got time for a few questions here. So first one is, obviously the British Army does have a reputation for having a command and control style. So how can the British Army experience apply to the FE sector when clearly people in the FE sector can't just tell people what to do?
So I'll absolutely start with that one. It's Jim, if no one can see me. So we absolutely do have this command and control culture. There are some times when actually the answer is, no, we really need you to do this, so go and do it. But actually, more important, and there's a whole section on it through the Centre for Army Leadership, who owns our leadership doctrine. It's all about leadership and followership and making people all feel part of the same plan. Mission command is one of our key tenets, and that basically means we need to get everybody to understand what it is we're trying to achieve and work out how it is they can get there. That doesn't work by telling people. So actually, having people understanding how they're behaving, understanding what it is they need to achieve, and understanding their part in what we're all doing is absolutely vital. So mission command, I'd suggest, rather than a culture of command.
Okay, thank you. Another question here is, so what consideration do you give to trauma-informed teaching and the impact of trauma on a student's ability to learn?